welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is May 10th, and we're going to start talking a little bit about Sonny Dykes and some of the comments he made about a possible split between the Power Four and the Group of Five conferences. Definitely a huge topic of conversation right now, but want to get into what that could possibly look like and some ideas that I have for how you can kind of have two separate entities but still overlap to a certain extent. But then we'll get into a little bit of a tough conversation that needs to be had with a couple of different programs out there. There is going to need to be an adjustment of expectations coming forward. You're just going to have to do that in the world of the super conferences. So wanted to break that down, why that is, and why a rude awakening is coming for some fan bases out there. Then we'll get into a little bit of a transfer portal update. I thought we might be done with this, but there have been plenty of recruitments that I definitely want to break down. And also, there was one big time flip that I definitely need to get into and how that kind of affects the rest of the portal and kind of how it affects specifically those two teams in particular. And then finally, we'll finish it off with a kind of a fun little segment talking about a hypothetical playoff bracket. It was put out by CBS, and I kind of want to get into that a little bit more. Shahan Jayaraja had done this, and it was a very, very interesting thing. I will definitely go in and do my own, probably post top 25, post spring top 25 at some point soon, but I figured I'd use theirs for the time being, and then we'll make our way around to my predictions. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here. You can ask a question you were wondering about, call me out on something I didn't say or said incorrectly. I'm all for anything. So again, you can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. It's a great way for you all to get, on the program a little bit, have a fun back and forth, and maybe ask a question you were wondering about. So definitely use that. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about Sonny Dykes. And he has said something that has been kind of brewing under the surface for quite some time, right? We've talked about this pretty much ad nauseum because it's the topic of conversation around college football. There is a hierarchy forming in college football that has been there for quite some time. I think we all understand there are certain haves and have-nots, and those go back quite a while in the world of college football. But what I can say is that has only been exacerbated over the last couple of years. I think we all feel pretty confident in that with NIL, with the transfer portal, with all of this different stuff. The scales are slowly tipping more and more into the big guys' direction, into the Power Five and the group of and away from the Group of Five's direction. So a split between these two has been discussed, and it's been something that has been a huge topic of conversation. Some people are very much for it, some people are very much against it. But no one, at least in terms of coaches, have really said anything concrete about it until now. Sonny Dykes has said they have to split eventually, essentially is the way he put it. He said there is such a big difference right now between the haves and have-nots, and I think we'll eventually split into two separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech aren't playing the same sport. And he's right. That's just the reality of college football right now. I kind of wish it wasn't, but, when you live in a world where money is kind of the way that this sport goes, and it's the way that a lot of these teams, it's required to be a big-time powerhouse in college football at this point. So that's just kind of the way of things. And Louisiana Tech and Alabama are on two totally different planets. If you were to go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and get a full tour around their facilities, you get a run-through of how things go in their operations, you meet all of the different staffers they have there. If you could do all of that, and then you go on down to Louisiana Tech, and you do the same exact thing, you would think these two people were not in the same league. You wouldn't even think they were in the same division of college football altogether. You would think that Louisiana Tech was not remotely competing for the same trophy that Alabama is, which brings us obviously to the big-time conversation that has been happening around the Group of Five, which is possibly breaking off to make their own playoff. And I think this is just, someone else saying in no uncertain terms, there's very little chance for these group of five teams to make it happen. And we'll get into it actually in the last segment when we go into the hypothetical playoff, because it's going to be a hard road for that hypothetical team in that playoff. But at the end of the day, when you look at the possibility for a group of five playoff and what that could look like, I think it's got to happen. And I think for the main reason of ever since the 12-team playoff has been thrown out there, and ever since we've been talking about it, it feels like there's been a sentiment, at least among some people, that we're going to have more Cinderellas, and it's going to be like March Madness, and we're going to have these crazy teams that find their way into the semifinals of the championship. That's not going to happen. I'm just being bluntly honest. Unless something crazy happens in a group of five team where they get, insane amounts of talent in the portal and do crazy things on the NIL trail. If they do things that are fiscally irresponsible or not possible for them to do, then they could pull it off. But the more pressing or the more realistic outcome is they get into the party, they get into the dance as the 12 seed. They go play one of, if not, the second or third best team in the entire country, because it's probably going to be the loser of the Big Ten or the SEC title game will be that five team. And if that's the case, they probably get steamrolled in Eugene, Oregon, or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or in Austin, Texas, or in Oxford, Mississippi, wherever it is. It's not going to be pretty. And let's just say they get through that environment. Let's just say they get through that physicality totally unscathed, because injuries are a whole other part of this that does not necessarily help group of five teams by any means. But if that happens, they do get the treat of playing the lowest ranked conference champion. The problem with that is you pull from teams like Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Utah, Kansas State, Arizona, at least for this particular year. So again, those are teams that likely you're not going to be able to compete with. That's just kind of the reality, and that's just the way that things are going to go in this new playoff. So it's going to be a fun thing to look at. I'm not arguing that, these 12-team graphics are going to be awesome. That's why I'm doing the hypothetical today, because it's so much fun to talk about these hypothetical games that are going to be coming up, and there's going to be some really, really, really fun ones. I just don't think they'll involve many of the group of five teams. Now, there is stuff in the cards for a group of five team, making it happen. We saw Tulane beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. I would argue if that was a playoff game, that's not the outcome. But at the end of the day, it's possible. It's just one of those things where if you're holding out hope that a group of five team will make a run to a championship or even a semifinal, I wouldn't hold your breath, because it's going to be a long time till that happens, and I'd be honestly surprised if it happened ever in this 12-team playoff, to be frankly honest with you. So, but also just another little point to this is TCU was able to get to the championship, and that was the most remarkable thing that we'd seen in quite some time. TCU is a far cry from a lot of these group of five teams. Now, Cincinnati did get into the dance one time around when it was not a great year around the Power Five, and there were a couple of teams that were not nearly as strong as they could have been, and Cincinnati got in and promptly got steamrolled by Bama. So all of this to say, just a group of five team is never going to win the college football playoff. I'll say that right now. I hope that I actually get, roasted for this later on, 5 years down the road, but they're never going to hoist that trophy. That's just, it's not in the cards. It's not something that's going to be sustainable, especially over a 17 game season where you don't nearly have the depth that these other teams do. So it's going to be tough. It's probably not going to happen. So let them play for their own trophy. Let them play against the teams that they're actually competing against on a daily basis, that they're actually in the same bracket with, that they're actually playing the same sport as Sonny Dykes put it. So I think there's a lot of things going into this, and obviously you don't want to see the group of five totally break off from the Power Five. That's not, I don't think, what any of us want. I think we want to see these two entities at least interact some, but they have to be different in the sense of what the postseason looks like. They just, unless you want the group of five teams to get a consolation trophy at the end of every year of saying, congratulations, you were the 12 seed in a playoff and got beaten and had to fly home the very next day, that's all well and good. I don't think that's what Group of Five team wants. So this has obviously been something that has been talked about by Derek Dooley and a couple other people trying to get traction on this. It hasn't gained as much traction as they would have liked, obviously, early on, but I do think the reality is once you get that money in place, and that's a big hurdle that they're going to have to get over in media deals and all of that type of stuff. But once that money is in place, Group of Five teams will jump at this opportunity and not look back. It's really just the reality of what position they're in, where they just have to start stackpiling cash. They have to make sure that they don't go into the red. And that's kind of the mission for the next little bit, especially for these Group of Five schools and some of the other schools, the Oregon State and Washington State, that are out there kind of on their own. They're doing their best to stay in a place where fiscally they can actually keep up, which is easier said than done, obviously. But once that money is in place, once that, is all ironed out and set in stone, all of this is going to happen. And I feel fairly confident about that. I think every Group of Five commissioner and every Group of Five athletic director will probably tell you that they'd rather do their own thing. They'd rather have their own playoff, but if the money's not there, it doesn't make sense to do that. It doesn't make sense just to, be on your own and lift a trophy without, the monetary value that comes with that. So as long as you can get over that $2 million per year to going to every team from the current college football playoff format, I think they're going to find their way out. And I think they'll do it rather quickly. So can they do that? It's a big hurdle to get over, and it feels like they're quite a ways from making that happen. But I kind of hope they do. I'll put it that way. I really do think that that would be the greatest thing for the Group of Five and for college football overall. Now, what would that look like? And I have a couple ideas of what the scheduling could look like in this grand scheme of things, and how you can have these two different entities when it comes to postseason, but the regular season can still kind of be mixed a little bit. So let's get into this real quick. And I think the biggest thing here is you got to have uniform scheduling. It's something I've been screaming from the treetops for a million years, and no one seems to really be making big progress on that. But if this were to happen, I think you would see that more and more, where, you're not able to play Group of Five teams quite as much. So I would say these Power Five or Power Four, whichever way it cuts, really, would be forced to play other Power 5 or Power 4 teams in the first 11 games of the season, or just 11 games a year. And then that extra game would be to the Group of Five team. That would, obviously help with the financial situation, where you still get that paycheck. You still get to, dole out that money to the smaller programs that need it in certain circumstances. And then in the Group of Five playoff could mirror what the Power Five is going to look like in structure. It could have the same number of teams. It could have the same formatting in terms of playing home games. It could just be entirely home games, just to make the scheduling a little bit easier in terms of getting actual stadiums to play in. But that could be a totally different thing. And then scheduling is obviously a huge part of this, where you don't want them all playing on the same day. Well, maybe Group of Five plays Thursday and Friday, and then you have the Power Five on Saturday. It gives you the ability to set up media deals with companies that are already in on the college football playoffs, so you don't have to necessarily struggle as much. You can compromise where you're going to need to, because you want to get on TV if you're the Group of Five and you want people watching. So those Thursday and Friday night slots in the fall, obviously Thursday night football makes that a little bit more sketchy, but Friday night is pretty open. And obviously you're not going to have the biggest of crowds, but you got to find a day that works for everyone and works the Group of Five into this. And I think Thursday or Friday could absolutely be an answer to that. And then finally, I think the non-Group of Five playoff, or the non-playoff Group of Five teams in this new format would play in pretty much any bowl game. The postseason in terms of the bowls is totally synchronous between the two, and I think that is totally doable. I think there's an ability where, you don't have to have entirely different postseasons. You just need to have different playoffs. And then you can have, the teams that just missed the cut for the playoff in the Group of Five and in the Power Five, they can find their way into different bowl games based on record, and you can have Power 5 teams playing Group of 5 teams. You can have Group of 5 teams playing other Group of 5, and vice versa with Power 5. So I think there's answers here. I guess the best way to sum this up, I think there's ways for them to move forward in asynchronous postseasons, asynchronous playoffs, but still as one entity. And it sounds like a weird concept. It sounds like something that, and maybe it is. Maybe it is my head in the clouds a little bit, but I do think it's possible. I do think that all this stuff can happen. You just got to have the right people at the wheel. And that's something that has been a little bit hard to come by for college football for quite some time. But you don't want to lose the App State going to College Station and getting a huge win for their program. You don't want to lose those games. So you got to keep at least some of that. And you don't have to keep a lot of it. And you can give these guys all the opportunity in the world to be in their own playoff and be on their own stand alone, essentially. But you can still give them the ability to play the big dogs and have those incredible moments and make what makes college football awesome. It's still intact, not going anywhere necessarily, just a little bit different of a formatting. So it'll be fascinating to see how this actually shakes out, who the players are, who ends up stepping up to the plate, if anyone does. So there's a ton of stuff going in every different direction. I do think the best way forward is Power 5 playoff, Group of 5 playoff, and then a postseason that somewhat overlaps with each other. But at the end of the day, that is a lot of clerical work. We will get there at some point, hopefully, but it might be a little ways down the road. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that I think needs to be talked about a little bit more in the world of the Super League, which is there's going to be need to be an expectation adjustment for a number of programs out there. And I'll get into a couple of examples of teams that could be under that, but also could be in great hands. It's much of a toss-up. So we'll get into kind of what I mean and how it's going to be a very interesting time for coaches and fans over this next little bit right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Sonny Dykes' comments about possibly a break between the Group of 5 and the Power 5. Definitely something that we've talked on here a lot about, but got into some specifics of what that could look like and how it could be a really good system if the right buttons are pressed. But before we get into our next segment, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all, and it gets your question on the screen, puts it at the top of the queue, so definitely makes it a lot of fun for both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump into this reality that is coming to college football, and it is the super leagues that are the SEC and the Big Ten. I think we all see them as the power players. I think everyone across the country sees them as what college football is going to be largely in the future, and it opens up a lot of different doors, right? It opens up for some remarkable matchups, some really cool new rivalries that'll start to pop up, some awesome talking points, some weird travel. All of this stuff is kind of tied into it. But one thing that has not necessarily been talked about quite as much, definitely has been kicked around a little bit, but it's definitely something that ties into what we were talking about with the coaching carousel yesterday, where it was 31 head coaches hired this past cycle, which is just mind-boggling. It was the most active in almost a decade. So it's just insane what happened in this portal cycle or in this coaching cycle, excuse me. And I do think we could be seeing more of that. Is that an anomaly? Is that the norm? And we'll kind of get into that right here. So when we talk about Ole Miss, for example, we talked about them a couple of days ago on Spotlight Wednesday, and when I was looking at their team, you're saying, man, there's tons of talent here. They can do literally anything they set their minds to. Everything is on the table for this team. They can absolutely win a national title. And then you go look at LSU and you say, man, if the right things go for this team, they could win a national title. They could do incredible things. You know, that offense could bounce back from last year. Maybe the defense isn't as bad as we all think it might be. And then you go look at Tennessee and you see the same thing, and Missouri and Kentucky and especially Georgia, Texas, Bama. So it gives you an idea of the players that you're dealing with in this new era of college football. I mean, the SEC alone, you have Georgia, Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, LSU, and Oklahoma. All those teams are expecting to have big years. I don't know what the expectation is for all of those fans. I'm sure there's some of those fans that are a little bit more reasonable than others, but when you look across those teams, I think every single one of those fan bases, if you were to poll them, would say at least 9 wins. And you might realize there's not 9 wins to go around for all of these teams. That's just the reality of the situation. Unless the rest of the teams in the SEC totally bottom out, that's just, there's not enough there. And then you go over to the Big Ten and you have Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Washington, Penn State, USC, all of these teams that really want to be a part of the conversation year over year. They want to win games. So I'm not a math major. I'm not necessarily the best in terms of math, but I do know that there's only so many wins to go around. I do know that there's only so much oxygen in the room. So there's going to be some weird conversations that are going to have to happen. There's going to be some teams that don't meet expectations, but what does that kind of mean in the future? Because at the end of the day, I don't really know what it means for 2024. I mean, it could be that a good coach in Billy Napier, who has a 7-5 Florida team, but they lost the last 5 games of their season where they play 5 of the top literally 10 teams in the entire country, and he gets fired because people want, more from the Florida program. Maybe Lincoln Riley can't handle the Big Ten and the physicality gets to him a little bit, or at least maybe that's the perception from the outside, and he gets canned in a couple of years. So the reality is, when you look at these power conferences and you look at all the incredible coaches that are across all of these power conferences, some are going to get clipped. That's just kind of the hard truth of this. When you look at the SEC, you have Kirby Smart, who is safe. I feel very confident that Kirby Smart is safe. But everyone else, Kalen DeBoer, I'm not confident will be at Bama in 5 years. Steve Sarkisian, I'm not necessarily fully confident he'll be at Texas in 5 years. Same with Lane Kiffin, same with Eli Drinkwitz, same with Brian Kelly. All of these things build up very, very quickly. And Texas, going from the Big 12 to the SEC, there's not layup games. There's not games that you absolutely should win no matter what, the way that there kind of were last year in the Big 12. So it's going to be interesting, I guess is the best way to put this. There's so many different things that go into this, and obviously I'm not saying, the majority of these coaches are going to be losing their jobs every single year, and there's going to be absolutely no leeway. Obviously, the playoff gives you a little bit more leeway where you can say, hey, I got to the playoff this past year. It gives you a little bit more time to figure out what you want to do. But let's just take Brian Kelly, for example. I'm not trying to pick on Brian Kelly. I don't think he's going to be fired at LSU because, frankly, I think he has a fantastic program and he's building something that is going to be sustainable for quite some time, which actually I'd like to get into probably on another segment next week, where I just want to get further into his NIL comments and how really right he was in the grand scheme of things. But we'll get to that later. Let's take Brian Kelly, for example. He is one of the best head coaches in the entire country. Period. End of story. I don't necessarily want to address any comments that I think any differently. This dude is at the very least top 10 in the entire country. He has won an insane clip at every single place that he has been, and he's had 10-win seasons in his first 2 years at LSU. That's a great thing. There's no two ways about that. Going into a program where a lot of people wrote you off before you even coached a game and winning 10 games 2 years in a row is absolutely huge. That being said, there were some issues in those 2 years. There's no two ways about that, and it was pretty much all the defense, right? You had defenses that were very lackluster the last couple of years, especially last year where you had a Heisman winner, you had two of the best wide receivers in the entire country, and you kind of squandered it by going 9-3, not making the SEC championship like you did in his first year, not doing some of the things that people expected from LSU going into the year. So that's definitely something that right now it's not a problem. Right now, Brian Kelly is okay. He has plenty of time to rebuild that defense into what it's going to be. And if you were to ask me, I think he's going to build LSU into the program that not only pops up every now and then and wins a title, but sticks around for a while and wins multiple titles and wins them in fairly quick succession. So we'll get to that, down the road, obviously. But the question is, what if that doesn't happen? What if it goes the other direction? What if, 9-3 is who they are in this new era of major conferences? What is the line of demarcation? How many times can they go 9-3 and have a bad defense? Or how many times can they have one side of the ball let down the other side of the ball before Brian Kelly has to, walk out that door? So all of this is, very hypothetical, obviously. Brian Kelly is very safe as of right now. He is going to get it figured out, and I think he's going to have a fantastic program over there in Baton Rouge. But this is the reality for all of these coaches. There's so many players, or there's so many teams and fan bases around the country that want to be in that playoff, that want to compete for conference titles, that want to win 10 games a year, but there's not enough games for them to win every year. So I think when you look at whether it's Missouri or Tennessee or Kentucky with Mark Stoops, there's so many fantastic coaches that at some point there's going to be a reality where a guy that goes 9-3 over a couple of years gets fired because it's not good enough, or a guy that stumbles 1 year but is building something and is kind of getting to that point is going to get fired before he gets the chance to reap those rewards. So it's going to be a cutthroat business, and it's going to be really, really weird, and you're going to have either guys get fired or hired at school and hired and fired at schools for just not meeting expectations that aren't feasible, that just mathematically cannot be done year over year. So it's going to be fascinating to watch all of this unfold. I'm sure fans are going to be all over these coaches when they go 9-3. If Brian Kelly goes 9-3 again this year, LSU fans will be looking at him a certain way. And if they go 9-3 in 2025, then conversations start to happen. And then if you go 9-3 in 2026, then you're probably fired. I'll be totally honest. So it's one of those things where LSU can be a fantastic team over the next 3 years. They can be one of the best teams in the entire country, probably even a top 15, top 12 team in the entire country, but lose 3 games. And it looks a lot worse, and you're not necessarily feeling the way you want to feel as an LSU fan, and then you make a decision that in the past you probably wouldn't have made. So it used to be, when coaches came on and they took a job, pretty much no matter the circumstances around that job at that point, they had 3 years or 4 years. They had at least 3 or 4 years to where they could get their team, they could get their recruits, and they could go to work. And that's just kind of the way things have been for quite some time. And that's changed drastically. It's pretty much, with the transfer portal, people think, flip it, win games right away. And it's not how it works, obviously. It's not something that's feasible. And if you are a coach that's hired into one of these situations, let's just say Eli Drinkwitz, underperforms for the next couple of years, Missouri fires him and hires someone else. Him walking into that situation is a nightmare, just to be totally honest, especially if it's someone that doesn't have experience in Power 5 coaching and in the NIL era, in the transfer portal era. It's going to be nearly impossible for them to keep up. So will that start, a churn of coaches through a ton of different programs around the country? Possibly. But I do think there has to be an adjustment of expectations. There's going to be some teams that are going to have to look themselves in the mirror and say, 9-3 is a good record. 9-3 is where we want to be. And that sounds bad, and that sounds like not necessarily what Ole Miss or LSU or Bama want coming forward, but it's going to happen to some team. I don't know that it's going to be those teams, but there's going to be a team out there that's going to have to say, we used to be a 8-4 team or a 9-3 team. Now we're a 7-5 team, and that's kind of just the way it is. And you can have a fantastic coach in there, and that can still happen. So it's going to be weird. I think some coaches are going to lose their job for doing something that is nearly impossible to pull off, frankly. I think there's going to be, fans that are mad for reasons that might not be fully fair, and I think it's going to create a very, very weird atmosphere in the world of coaching, and a lot of people looking over their shoulder at all times, at their fan base and at their athletic director and everything, because a lot of things are about to change, and that means the circumstances around the way we view coaches is about to change, and you hope it doesn't change too much, but if history tells us anything, it's going to be aggressive, and people are not going to give them the leeway that maybe they deserve. But we'll see what happens there. I think adjustment of expectations is going to be something that either is going to happen, or a lot of athletic departments are going to have to start saving up money now, because you're going to be paying a lot of buyouts and hiring a lot of new guys and paying signing bonuses. So just prepare yourself for what is to come down the road, because it's going to be a little bit all over the place, especially in the world of coaching. And hopefully your team is not the one that bites it in this, but they very well could be. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all this unfolds. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a transfer portal update. There were tons of commitments coming in, including one big-time flip that I want to get to, and then some intel on some of the guys that are still just lurking out there, just still looking for their place to be. So want to break that down after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things going on with kind of the differences that's going to happen in the new Super League, in the new Super Conference era, because some coaches are going to be under some very, very aggressive expectations, and we'll just see how that adjustment happens and see if some coaches bite the dust because of it. But let's get into the transfer portal, and let's talk about what has kind of happened over the last couple of weeks, because there has been some craziness even after the portal has closed. We've seen some players leave the school that they were at for, a couple of months and find a new place to play. We've seen a couple of commitments flip, which have been absolutely insane. But let's get into some of the commitments, and then we'll get into the intel of all the guys that are still on the board, still trying to find out where they're going to play next. But let's start with Demarcus Davis, a very, very talented quarterback that was at Washington. He was a 4-star in the class of 2024, so was only there for about a couple of months. Obviously, with the coaching change, he has now decided to find another place to play. He's going to UCLA, and that's an absolutely huge pickup for the Bruins and for Deshaun Foster. They need a guy, and they need someone that is going to be, the first quarterback in this new kind of rebuild of UCLA, and I think this is going to be the kid. I don't know if he's going to start this year in particular, but I do think he's going to be the guy in 2025 and going forward, and will definitely be a big-time player for them. Is very, very talented, can do a ton of really, really incredible stuff, so very excited to see what he can do. I think at some point you will see him as the starter for UCLA. Another guy I assume will be the starter here pretty soon, probably not this year, but at some point, is Sam Heward. He was started his career at Washington, was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, a highly touted guy that was very, very talented. Didn't necessarily catch on at Washington the way that he'd hoped. He went to Cal Poly and absolutely tore it up. Was incredible during his time there. He has now found his way up to the Power 5 level again, and he's at Utah. He is going to be probably the backup to Cam Rising, and it's something that Utah desperately needed, to be totally honest with you. That quarterback room looked a lot of Cam Rising and not a ton else, or at least not a ton of confidence in the rest that you have. So I think adding Sam Heward definitely gives them a little bit better peace of mind when you go forward in the portal era. And then you have Gavin Wimsatt coming from Rutgers. He just got beat out by Ethan Kaliak-Manis for that starting job. And I think this is kind of like Heward, where you're probably not going to be the starter this year, but you give your team a lot of stability at that position. You give your team the ability to trot out there and say, if Vandegrift does go down, we at least have a kid that has played Power 5 ball, that can make good decisions, and had a really solid year for Rutgers a year ago. So definitely someone that, at the very least, brings a little bit more stability to that room. But then we have Mike Wright, another quarterback that is committed to Northwestern. This was one of the places that we were looking for. This is one that we were definitely waiting for, where it felt like Northwestern's quarterback position was a little bit up for grabs. They do have Ryan Helinski up there among a couple other guys, but I think Mike Wright might just be the guy that trots out there in week 1. And part of that is because his athleticism is off the charts. This dude is a remarkable running threat, can definitely do incredible things with his legs. So I think for a team like Northwestern, who is likely going to struggle on the offensive side of the ball, having a guy that can make something out of nothing helps that a lot. So I would very much expect him to maybe not be the starter in week 1. He definitely could be, but at some point in the year, I would expect him to be the starter for Northwestern. And then we had Alton McCaskill, a very talented running back that was at Colorado a year ago after some time at Houston. He is now committed to Arizona State. This is a huge pickup for Arizona State. I think when you add him to Raleek Brown in that room, it gets very, very scary very quickly. He had a great year in 2022 at Houston, so definitely a very talented kid. Didn't quite work out the way he wanted to at Colorado, but plenty of good football still left in this kid, so very excited to see what he can do. Jake Bostic is a wide receiver that was at Iowa for quite some time. Didn't play much, was in 5 games, but didn't record any stats. But he's now at Texas A&M, where I think he's going to be a big-time rotational guy. They had a couple of guys come in, including Jabri Barber from Troy, but he's gone down with an injury and is likely out for a couple of months. So you need other guys to step up, and I think Jake Bostic can absolutely be that guy. So very excited to see what he can do. This Texas A&M wide receiver room is a little sneaky. It's not necessarily the most talented. It's not necessarily have that big-time guy out there, but if they can put it together on the offensive side of the ball, especially with Colin Klein calling plays, it could be a really, really good group that just fits together like puzzle pieces. But then we had SMU kind of go on a little bit of a tear, especially on the offensive line, and especially from Arkansas. They got Andrew Chambly and Paris Hilton to both commit, or Paris Patterson, very, very different people. Paris Patterson and Andrew Chambly have committed to SMU. They obviously lost Branson Hickman to Oklahoma, so a huge void to fill for SMU there, and got 2 guys that are absolutely going to be big players for them. Both could likely start right away, and both coming from Arkansas definitely makes you feel a little bit better about the physicality that they can handle. But let's move to the defensive side of the ball, and let's start with the back end. And Austin Jordan, he is committed to TCU. This is one of the guys that found his way out of Texas, along with Terrence Brooks in that back end. So definitely a great move for him, a great place for him to end up, closer to his hometown, immediate playing time, probably a starter to be totally honest with you, and definitely still playing at a very high level of football. So great pickup for the Horned Frogs, great place for Austin Jordan to end up, and definitely is a guy that could play himself into quite a bit of money over the next couple of years. And then you had Deshaun Jones, who is probably the biggest commodity out there in terms of corners and back-end talent. He is committed to Bama. This is something that we expected for quite some time. It feels like Bama is taking kind of that Ole Miss approach where you lost all these guys. you just got to bring in a ton of bodies, and you got to hope that you can figure out the 5 that fit together. Now, you really only have to figure out 4 because Malachi Moore is very solid. I have no questions about Malachi Moore. But they've done a great job of pulling in guys that are absolutely going to help. I would be surprised if Deshaun Jones was not a huge part of the rotation, and he might even be a starter week 1. That dude is incredible and definitely adds some much-needed depth to that room. Another big-time pickup at the cornerback position was Omarion Cooper making his way back to Florida State. He was at Colorado a year ago after, I believe, he was freshman year Florida State, sophomore year Colorado, and now back to Florida State. So a kid that, decided the grass was not greener, as we've been talking about quite a bit. So I think this is a kid that has elite talent, can definitely be a Sunday type player, but he needs to be at the right position, and he needs to be under the right tutelage and under the right coaching. And I think Florida State is probably a better place for him to do that. Now, it's not to say that Colorado can't do that, because you see what Travis Hunter is capable of doing, and you definitely see the development that has happened there. But I think when you get on the field at Florida State and when you're able to go up against, some of the big boys that they're going to go up against, I think it just prepares you a little bit more. So Omarion Cooper feels like he's taken a little bit more of the diplomatic approach, playing a little bit more of the long game in this in college football, in kind of the way that he wants to go about business. Another one that Florida State picked up was Cam Riley, and this was one that a lot of people didn't expect, partly because he was committed to NC State and actually played in their spring game, I do believe, and I think he will be a player immediately for them. Florida State needed some help in that linebacking room, so Cam Riley's an absolute gift. This guy is really, really good, and this Florida State defense just continuously gets more and more scary. But then you had Bai Jobe commit to Kansas, which was a fantastic pickup for Lance Leipold. They definitely needed the difference maker on that pass rushing side, and Bai Jobe can absolutely be that dude. So very, very excited about that. I think he's someone that is going to be a big-time player and possibly could be a huge reason that Kansas finds its way to Arlington. So definitely a big pickup there. We had Johnny Chaney, a very talented linebacker who was all SWAC a year ago, all SWAC second-teamer a year ago, has 140 tackles over his career. He's now at Colorado, so a huge pickup for them. They need as many bodies as they can on that defensive side of the ball, and they've done a great job doing that. But one guy that did leave on the defensive side of the ball is Chaz Wallace. He's found his way to North Carolina State, a great pickup for the Wolfpack. Definitely lost some guys on that interior of that defensive line that you need some bodies. And Chaz Wallace is a very talented kid that definitely can give you a lot of really quality snaps. And then you have CJ West, one of the bigger defensive tackles that was still on the board as of a couple of days ago, and he is committed to Iowa. This is incredible by Curt Cignetti. I'm astounded the way that he has been able to rebuild that roster, because it's been about, I think, like 37 guys coming into that and like 35 going out. So it's just insane what has had to happen for him in 1 year, but this might be the biggest pickup of them all, because this guy is going to play immediately. He's going to play a big part immediately, and is absolutely a huge pickup for them. And then we had the big shocker, which was Jermaine Lole flipping from Oklahoma to Texas. This is something that obviously is a huge coup for Sark and company. I don't really know how they pulled this off, to be totally honest, but it sounds like Dominic Williams commits and they say, okay, we'll go take we'll go take the other one that you guys got in this portal cycle. So huge win for Texas. They get a ton of experience, over 1,500 snaps for this kid in his career. So can play all over the place, whether it's, 1 tech, 3 tech, or 5 tech. Is a very, very talented kid. I also added Bill Norton and Tia Savea. So they added a lot of experience on that D-line to go with some of the youth that is very talented but just hasn't quite been rounded out the right way. So it's going to be an incredible group on that defensive line. It's turned from a worry for a lot of Texas fans to one thing that I don't think they're going to be too worried about going forward. But let's get into all the guys still left on the board and give you guys an idea of where all of them sit, because it's a lot. There's still some guys out there that definitely have a lot going into the next couple of weeks, and King Mack is maybe one of the biggest guys in the portal right now. It seems like he's all Bama. I think he's locked in there. I think you can almost pencil him in as the next guy going to Bama, which would add to that DB class that is becoming more and more impressive. Gavin Meyer is a guy from Wyoming, a defensive tackle, another defensive tackle that has found his way into the mix because so many of the big guys came off the board. Apparently, Florida State has been in contact with him, so trying to add even more to that defensive side of the ball and help them out more. And this would be a great pickup, a guy that did incredible things at Wyoming and definitely can give you some really good snaps. You had Cormani McLean, who has yet to make a decision, but it is expected very soon. I have no intel on this kid. I have no idea where he's going to end up. I have no idea where he's even leaning at this very moment because it's been very hush-hush. I've not heard any teams necessarily that have reached out to him. I've just heard conferences. So it'll be fascinating to see where he ends up. Tyler Barron is still sitting as an Ole Miss versus Miami battle. It sounds like Ole Miss is being harder and harder to push away, but I'd still lean Miami. It's just getting closer and closer in that commitment, though, for sure. Oh, excuse me. Jacoby Matthews is someone who's trending towards the Washington Huskies, and this feels like something that definitely will help Washington a ton. You need someone on that back end of that defense that can be the security blanket for you, and Jacoby Matthews is incredible. He's done someone that played really, really well when he was at Texas A&M, and given more snaps, I think is just going to be even better. So it would be a huge pickup for Jed Fish and company. You also have Jaden Mangum, another safety out there on the board from Michigan State. He's a guy that is visiting Ohio State here pretty soon, I believe, and then going to Nebraska, and then he'll go to Michigan this following weekend. So a ton riding on this guy. This is a very, very talented kid. I lean Nebraska just because the other two are so solid at that position, but this is not a kid that's going to be scared away from competition. Was a second-team All-Big Ten player last year, 4 picks on the year, so very talented, can definitely play at any number of these schools, but I would just lean Nebraska just a touch. Johnny Bowens is another guy to watch at the defensive tackle position, a 4-star coming out of high school. He went to Oregon, didn't necessarily work out. I've heard Texas' name mentioned in this, but with Jermaine Lole flipping over, I don't expect them to pick him up, so I'm not sure where he's looking, but it probably will not be in Austin, Texas. Curtis Perry, another defensive tackle from Alabama. It looks like he's looking at Virginia Tech more and more. They're picking up a lot of steam on the portal trail. Elijah Herring, a linebacker from Tennessee, is very, very talented. He has a new favorite. He's been bouncing around a little bit, had Colorado, Kansas State, had Virginia Tech here for a minute, but now it seems like Memphis is the leader in the clubhouse. Definitely would be a huge pickup for them, a guy that would absolutely start, might be the best player on their defense right away. And then you have Bryce Foster, who is a little bit of an unknown right now. He did take a visit to USC, which seems like it went very well, would be an absolutely huge pickup for Lincoln Riley and company, but not sure we're necessarily super close to a commitment there. But whoever gets him, I think is probably getting a starter right away. There's no doubt about that. So the transfer portal is still wild. There's still plenty of dominoes left to fall. Jermaine Lole flipping was obviously the biggest of the news because not only, flipping this late in the process, but who he flipped from and to is obviously the big story there. So a huge pickup for Texas, a big-time blow for Oklahoma. We'll get into that a little bit next week, probably talking about Texas and Oklahoma in a little bit more detail and what they look like going into the SEC. But we're going to take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the projected playoff based on some postseason rankings that came out from CBS. So I want to break that down for you guys. Always a fun exercise to go through. So we'll do that right after this. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal and how it still had a little bit for us. Even after it's been closed and we felt like some of the craziness was behind us, there were still a couple of ers and ahs to throw in there late. So I wanted to break those down for you guys. But now let's get into the playoff. And we have gotten into a couple of different hypothetical scenarios, but this one is a little bit more concrete, gives you a post-spring look at things, and this came from Dennis Dodd. He had a top 25 post-spring ranking, which I will be coming out with, I promise. I'm not just going to steal his. I do think I just want to take a little bit more time to figure out where I want everyone slotted and everything, so likely we'll be coming out on Tuesday of next week, maybe on Wednesday. We'll see what happens there, but for the time being, I do want to use his because makes things a little bit easier on myself for the time being. But let's get into, first of all, what these playoff seeds will be. And the big thing here is you have to figure out who's going to win the conference, which is a very, very tough thing to do, obviously. And there's obviously some wrinkles that are thrown into this. One of the things, you have the four up top. Those are the four conference champions. Georgia winning the SEC, Ohio State winning the Big Ten, Utah winning the Big 12, and Clemson winning the ACC. Those are all the teams that are favored to win those conferences as of right now, so it makes sense. But one of the very interesting things from this was in the rankings, he had LSU at number 10. And LSU, obviously, as you can see, is not in the 12-team field. That's because Utah, Clemson, and Boise State were ranked below them, but they got to get in. So that's part of what this, auto bid format is going to look like, where you're going to have some teams that are in the top 10 or sitting at number 10 and get jumped by a couple other teams that might not be better, but they got to get in somehow. So that's another reason why I've always been in favor of no auto bids, but that's kind of a hard sell I've found in the college football world right now. But at the end of the day, it does add a little bit interesting of a dynamic here. Michigan was also 12 but didn't make the cut, so there's definitely some things. There's some ers and ahs that are going to happen that are going to make some fan bases a little upset. So if you're looking at your team, if you're an LSU fan, for example, and you're looking at your team and they're sitting at number 10 towards the end of the year, don't feel quite as comfortable as you might think you might want to feel. But let's get into what this would kind of look like in practice and what these matchups would look like. So the first round is pretty awesome. I got to be totally honest with you. Oregon versus Boise State. This would be great. Two teams that are not too far from each other, so not a long trip for Boise State fans to get to Eugene. They get to play under the lights. Now, as we talked about earlier, this is kind of a nightmare. Oregon is going to be one of the best teams in the country. I have them probably as the third best team in the country right now, as does Dennis Dodd, it seems. So I think this is kind of the reality of being a group of 5 team in the playoff. You're going to get the 12 seed. You're going to play one of the best teams in the country, and you're going to play them on their home turf. And that's going to spell for a lot of really, really tough things for the group of 5 teams. But we'll get into that more and more as we kind of go down the barrel of what a group of 5 playoff would look like. But sticking with this one, you have Texas against Penn State. This is an awesome matchup for so many reasons because this is not a matchup we've seen very often. It's a matchup I've never seen. So it's something that I absolutely am going to love about this new future where you get to see Texas against Penn State. You get to see Michigan against Tennessee. All these games that you wouldn't even, dream of watching, you now get a chance to see, which is very, very cool and definitely a cool addition to this. And then you have Alabama against Notre Dame. 2 classic programs, 2 of the most classic programs, 2 of the blue bloods in this game, and they're playing in Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's about as good as it gets in college football, so that would just be incredible to watch. That would definitely be something that appointment television is the best way to put it. And then you have Ole Miss against Missouri. This is kind of the battle of, who is going to be the SEC team going forward, who's going to be that team that is sitting right around the Alabama, Texas, Georgia, that echelon of teams in the next little bit, because both these teams have very big time claim. Ole Miss is definitely battling to be in that fight. Missouri is trying to build off a year that they just had. So whoever wins this game would definitely get a huge bump in that. And then the problem is you get rewarded by playing Georgia, playing the team that might have beaten you in the regular season, the team that probably won or definitely won the SEC in this scenario. So definitely not what either of these teams would want. They want to see UGA as late in the process as possible, but that's the new reality, and it would definitely be very interesting. This would be the Sugar Bowl, so playing in New Orleans would definitely give Ole Miss a little bit of a better advantage to get there and have some of the fans there, but Definitely not the situation that I think Ole Miss or Missouri wants to find themselves in necessarily. But then you have Ohio State against Alabama or Notre Dame. It goes back to the Alabama and Notre Dame conversation. Two classic programs at the Rose Bowl as the host for this. It would just be incredible. It would be one of the coolest things. The spectacle of that would just be off the charts awesome. So that's another incredible matchup. Then you get the Fiesta Bowl with Utah and then Texas or Penn State, whoever comes out there. This would be a very interesting, weird matchup. There's another one that we haven't seen very often that we'd absolutely love to see, and you're going to get it a little bit more in this 12-team playoff. So this would be a great, fun matchup. Texas is getting a lot of these, interesting, weird matchups of teams they usually wouldn't play. So that's definitely going to be very interesting. And then you have Clemson against Oregon or Boise State. I've said it's probably going to be Oregon, but let's just say it's Oregon, and it's Dan Lanning, trying to be coronated into the next part of his career and be one of the best coaches in the country and play with the big boys. Or is it Dabo getting back to where he should be at the top of the rung and being the guy? Or is it, the Cinderella that we talked about, the unlikely Cinderella of Boise State making some noise? So a ton going into that game. That would be a Peach Bowl, which gives Clemson a huge advantage over these other two teams that are out in the Pacific Northwest. But at the end of the day, this would be a very fun game. And another one we don't see very often, Oregon and Clemson. I couldn't tell you the last time they faced off. But let's get into the semifinals of this, and it kind of goes the way that you would think it would go, right? When we look at the new reality of college football, the SEC and the Big Ten are the teams, and I think it's fair to say that the four teams that are playing in the two teams in Indy and the two teams in Atlanta at the end of the year are the four best teams in the country. Now, obviously, some things can happen to make that not the case. Florida State could be a fantastic team. Utah could be, remarkable the way that some people expect them to be. So there's things that could happen to get in the way of that, but I feel pretty confident when I say that these are the four best teams in the country going into the year, and no matter if those are the four teams that come out of those two conferences, whoever is in those conference champions will be the four best teams in the country. I feel pretty confident about that, but for right now, they have SEC against Big Ten in both of these. So they have Georgia against Oregon, would be just incredible. We saw it early on in the Bo Nix era at Oregon, and it was not pretty. But Oregon has obviously come a very, very long way since then. Dan Lanning has made that program into hopefully what Georgia can be, or what Georgia has been over the last couple of years, is what he's hoping over the next couple of years. So that will be a fascinating matchup. See how far Oregon has come, see how much of the gap they have closed with the Georgias of the world. And then Ohio State against Texas. It's as good as it gets. I've said that 10 different times in this segment, but man, these matchups are just going to be incredible. If you get Ohio State and Texas in Jerry World, it's going to be incredible. It's going to be two fan bases that are crazy, that a lot of people hate, that no one who is not a fan of either of these teams, they're not going to know who to root for. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be awesome. So if that were to come to fruition and this were our semifinals, I think we'd be in for just an incredible night. But let's get on to the final, and it's the two top seeds, partly just because it makes life a little bit easier. You don't have to justify. You just say, those are the two teams that set themselves up the best. So Georgia and Ohio State, they're the two best teams in the country. I think everyone feels pretty confident when they say that. I think there's no real question about that at this very moment. Now, Oregon and Texas are not too far behind, but those teams are setting the pace. And I think this could be a scenario where you're looking at a championship that you could see a lot over the next little bit. And I know this is a 12-team playoff, so that makes things a little bit murkier. But I do see a reality where Ohio State and Georgia are teams that have a Clemson and Bama type rivalry, and not, every single year as it was in the 14 playoff, but I could see them facing off for the big time trophy multiple times over the next decade. And that would be incredible. That would be remarkable television. I think it would make Ryan Day obviously be, one of the best coaches in the country and be rivaling the guy that he would be facing off against in Kirby Smart. So it would be fascinating to watch. These are the teams that, if I had to make a pick for a national title, that would be my pick, although it's a little bit of a bland pick. But we're well down the road from that. I'm not going to get into predictions until probably around August, but at the end of the day, this would be incredible. I think it would be a Clemson and Bama level title game. I think it would be an absolute classic, and this postseason is going to be interesting. We're going to get tons of really cool games. We're going to get tons of games you've never seen before, tons of games that you used to see, but now they're in different conferences, but you get to see them again on the same field. So there's going to be incredible things that come from this sport. Obviously, this was all a hypothetical, so it'll be interesting to see how all of this develops, but at the end of the day, when you look around college football and you look at what the 12-team playoff is going to be, there's negatives, and I've been pretty firm in the thought that they jumped the shark when they went past 6. But at the end of the day, we're at 12, and when you look at some of these games, it's hard not to be excited. It's hard not to get into the excitement about this new era of college football. So I'm on board, and I'll do these hypotheticals as many times as I need to, because talking about some of these games is just incredible, because the games are just going to be off the walls awesome. So it's going to be crazy year. It's going to be all over the place, and it's going to be bumpy for some teams. Some teams are not going to meet expectations. Some teams are going to over-deliver. It's going to be a weird year, but at the end of it, I feel very confident we are going to get multiple really, really classic games in that playoff, whether it's from a historical perspective or just the game on the field. I think we're going to get some games that are going to make everyone become a college football fan for the night. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this. Finally, I do want to do some light housekeeping, give some announcements here. One, just a minor announcement, more for me than it is for you, to be totally honest, but we are moving to 5 segments a day instead of 4, so it will be a little bit shorter, a little bit less of me rambling on, so that'll definitely be nice for you all. But also, along with that, because we're adding more segments, I do want to do more fan-driven content. I do want to do more answering questions you have about the postseason, maybe predictions you have going into the next season, whatever it is. I just want to be able to include you guys more, and maybe have a segment where I can flash up a question on the screen and answer it, or flash up a prediction on the screen and react to it. So I think it'd be a very, very cool way to get you guys more involved in the show, and definitely make the show more interactive and more fun for us all. But definitely leave a comment on here if you want to do that. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, if you have any, gripes with me that you want me to address, I'm more than happy to do that as well. So I think it's going to be a great new era of this show, and I'd love for you guys to be a big time part of it. So definitely leave any questions in the comments as you have them. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need across every sport you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing incredible work across every single sport. So definitely tune in to GSMC if you need anything in the world of sports. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.